We've got John here from HABCRO and housing, what do we call it, John? The housing, this program.
So this is part of, and actually, if you can see, are you able to?
Oh, yeah, I can switch that over.
So what's on the screen right now is what's known as the Montana Community Reinvestment Plan Act. This was enacted through the 2023 legislature. And what ended up happening is there was $50 million that was allocated to be able to be utilized across the state. And that allocation was based on a percentage of GDP. So for example, Jefferson County GDP equals a certain percentage, therefore then you got a percentage of that amount. That was how it was distributed. Now the intent is to be able to, as this reads, the Montana Community Reinvestment Plan that enables regional community reinvestment organizations to reduce the cost of to an affordable range for Montana's workforce. The idea was to bring these funds down from the state level and into the community, so the community then could determine what would be the highest and best use of those proceeds within each community, rather than it being, a state driven. So it gave us the opportunity to be able to identify parcels. For example, in Billings, I'll share with you what we did in Yellowstone County, as to how then we're able to provide the tools and resources to be able to do that. So as a result of this, there had to be a community reinvestment organization that had to qualify with the state. And so the first step was HAB Development, which is an offshoot of Homefront, or the Housing Authority of Billings, stepped forward and said, we are willing to be a CRO for the whole state. And as a part of that process, then, and part of the legislation, each county had to identify a CRO and elect to participate in the program, two with which Jefferson County did, and selected HAB Development as that. So then they moved forward with the process and were actually formally certified to be able to do so. And then as a condition for each one of the communities, in order for those monies to be able to be qualified and be pulled down from the state, HAB actually had to provide proof of matching funds. And so not only did they become the CRO, but they also identified the matching funds in order to be able to then allow the counties to even gain access to the monies in the first place. So that was hurdle number one. It was a big hurdle, no doubt. Those monies now have been pulled down from the state. I'm going to show you what that is now. So the total amount that's sitting right now with HAB is the $19,555,000. Okay, and the reason why that's not the full 50 is because there were other counties across the state that elected to go with an alternate CRO. Okay, so based on then these participating counties, that is then the reason as to why that amount sits at the $19.5 million. If you take a look for Jefferson, that is the amount that is allocated to Jefferson, which is the 95% of the total amount, which is the $235,427. That's the state allocated funds. Now HAB will match that, so the total amount is going to be double that by the time it's all said and done. What does the number 5 mean? Well, if we I'm going to step back just a little bit and give a little bit of history on what we've done in Yellowstone County. The state took in excess of 2 years from the time of when the legislation was passed to the point to where, the rules and getting the CRO certified and all that before the monies were even transferred and everything was certified. That was lights on go. That would have been about May of last year. And so that's when then we began to start to do our community outreach and communicate with folks. However, during that 2-year time period, because we were all, myself, HAB Development, we were in Yellowstone County, we began to identify parcels that HAB Development had, the city had, the county had, the school district had, and we began to model how we could utilize those unused parcels in a way that we could develop this program. And so that's the precedent that I'll be able to share with you guys, to be able to demonstrate what we did there and how then we may be able to apply that practice, here through strategy and other things. All of those parties I mentioned, were, excited and willing to participate. And as I was mentioning earlier, the ability to be able to use this product for their own employees, because as a requirement, the mortgage product that is put in, the total mortgage payment for this home can be no more than 30% of the household income. Okay, so it's based on a percentage of household income versus an interest rate and the cost of asset. And in addition to that, this mortgage program will not require any down payment, or if some very little, as far as, application fees, that sort of thing. So the goal behind the program is to define attainability, which is most folks, don't have the down payment requirements. So this mortgage product doesn't require that, and for the payment to be affordable. Another component to this is that the state required that it be a deed restricted product. We took it one step further, and it's not only deed restricted, but that there's a right of first refusal for the program to buy it back. Because in exchange for them getting a decreased mortgage and having no down payment, their rate of appreciation on the home is capped at 1%. Okay, and it's more than fair. I mean, if you think about it, they don't have any money in it. They've got, their payment is now half, so they're retaining those retained earnings and able to put it to other household expenses. And so when you understand the fact that we're really reinvesting the physical asset, so that we as a community, and me assisting you in your community, don't just build a product and then it's a one-off where, the first home buyer, it's out of the system. That's, from a community stability perspective, that's critically important, especially when you look at it from, a public employer, perspective. As I was mentioning earlier, there's, when we put your employer hat on and we're looking to need to hire a new deputy or whatever this may end up being, you don't have the ability to be able to put together, hiring bonuses and other things. But if you have the ability to be able to house that individual, and so then it becomes not only community stability perspective, but also becomes an employer retention tool. And so that became really attractive to everybody that I just mentioned in Yellowstone County. So when you look at it from that perspective, we're not just talking about an affordable housing product that we're going to come in and build one time. The intent is for this to truly be an ongoing tool and resource for the community today as well as into tomorrow. So it's kind of a mindset. I just wanted to kind of frame that. I will go through and we'll enter into discussion where there's going to be a Q&A, and that'll be kind of the balance of our meeting so that you guys can ask questions and understand it from your perspective. And so that's the dollar amount. That's the history on where it came from. Again, the Montana Community Reinvestment Plan. HAB now is referred to as HABCRO, which there is a website you can go to. And that is habcro.com. And if you look, here are the regions. So these are the counties. All the ones in green are the ones that are a part of it. And that was the list of financials I just showed you for the 19 million. So what I want to talk about, I'm not going to go through this whole site. You guys can do that at your leisure. But the one thing that I want to talk about is also during that couple of year period of time, it's one thing to allocate monies from anywhere to apply to a mortgage product or buy down the cost of a home, but it's another issue when the home itself doesn't even exist. Mm-hmm. Communities throughout our state, the physical rooftops aren't there, and so what a part of this program, what we were able to do in working with local banks and others, is the ability to actually physically develop, construct, and deliver the home through this program as well. So not only is there the state monies that are going to come down and the matching funds to buy down the cost of the mortgage, But this program and HABCRO as your CRO is also going to be able to come in and provide all the construction, development, oversight, and funding for the development and construction of the mill. That's an important thing to understand because it's usually obviously the missing piece, right? And so it's important to understand that that's going to be a key part of this. What I'd like to share with you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to step really quickly into an example of one of the locations that was put forth. I'm kind of proud of HAB because they actually kind of put their money where their mouth is. They had a piece of land in Billings that is, this is going to be off of King Avenue. So this corner of this right here is Sam's Club, just to kind of put it into perspective where it is geographically. This is the parcel. It's about 4.3, almost 4.5 acres. And so what happened is that, and we also did the same thing with the school district. So SD2 had a 2.5 acre parcel up in the Heights directly across from Castle Rock Middle School. So those are the two parcels that we went through over the 2 years. We assisted the school district, for example, in getting it from a P2 rezoned to an N1 from a use perspective. We then put in and identified the site planning that would be necessary for it. And then we also assisted the school district to identify there's state requirements for a district. If they're going to sell or remove a piece of property that's owned, they have to deem it unusable, and there's a whole process they have to go through. We assisted them with that. We're in the final stages of that now. So there's two examples, but we're only going to talk about one. I don't need to waste time in talking about both. So utilizing that, HAB Development said, okay, we have this piece of land. We would like to contribute it to the program. Now, I want to be clear on what contribution means, okay? Because if I had an asset or you as the county had an asset and you're going to contribute it to something, that does not mean that it is simply being gifted. What it means is that that piece of property is brought in, it's used as a collateral component to the bank, but and there's a value assessed to that piece of property at the time that comes in. Then whatever then the development, whatever occurs, in this case, there's going to be 35 individual dwellings. So what happens is at the time of closing, when each one of those homes are sold under the program, meeting all the criteria I mentioned earlier, 1/35 of that value of that land is collected at closing and paid to HB Development. So in other words, when we talk about, tools and resources and everybody working together, that's an example of utilizing a tool and a resource, in this case, that HAB Development owned. We're working with the city on some potential park spaces that, they're going to look that is not currently being used. School district is an example. So it's important from a terminology perspective, when I refer to it as contribute, that's what I mean. Okay, that's really an important thing. So we went then, in this case, we went through the site planning process. So in this case, we didn't go through the subdivision process. And so site planning is just handled at the planning level. So that then ended up. Let me go, pardon me.
So you didn't actually subdivide the piece of property?
Did not. So what's going to happen is, so this has to do with conveyance. Are you guys familiar with the difference between, subdivide or a warranty deed conveyance where the home and the land conveys versus a condominium conveyance is where the unit and structure conveys, and then each one of them has a 1/35 interest in the whole. It's just how the deed and transfer is worded. But what that process and what she's clarifying is that not having to then go through the subdivision regulatory process kicks it into a completely different review set. And so we made sure that the mortgage product would conform with a condominium project, and therefore it didn't require subdivision. So in this case, it was more.
Our county may be a little different because we don't have zoning pretty much in most of the county, and our zoning that we do have doesn't address condominiums, so subdivision review would be required here.
So in this case, I'm anticipating, and this is part of the things that we're gonna talk about, this does not have to be on county land. So I'm anticipating the first thing that we wanna do, and this is what I work with everybody, is to identify what parcels potentially either are city-owned, county-owned, school district-owned, or even privately owned, that are inside of municipal services. And so therefore, then it would fall into the city, regulations, and then their planning, venue from there. And that's part of what this outreach is that let's talk about and identify what those parcels are, right? And now that we understand what the definition of contribution means, it kicks it into a completely different conversation. We're not asking for things to be free or taking assets off of balance sheets. And so it really opens up a lot more opportunities. The other thing too is that for us to come in and say, hey, we found a piece of property, here's what we're gonna do, would have been inappropriate. This is a situation where we need to come in and say, here is what we can do and here's how we can work together. And then it's up to this board and other community members to determine then even what demographic may be the most important demographic to the community. I used an example earlier, one that would potentially be, an employee of yours or the district or others. And so, when we think about it from, community stability, that's an important variable.
Does it have to be one of them people that,
Absolutely not.
okay,
It does not. It's just, again, back
just another
to,
part of it?
but yeah, and I think it's something that needs to be discussed, right? Because, when we look at it and if there isn't the available home or retention ability for that critical individual, whatever we need to assess that first. And then if it's not, no, this is absolutely unconditioned in all forms. And that's why I'm presenting it to you the way that I am, and the fact that for me to have told you or anybody else, this is how it's going to be, and we end up saying, geez, I wish we would have known about that before, is kind of why we're talking about this the way that we are. So just then I'll finish up and then we'll open it up to discussion, okay? Because I think I've given enough background for us to dive into it. So this is what that piece ended up creating and looking like. And so this ended up being detached units. They look just like a single family home. Okay, so this is a denser, project here. But individual homes, they're 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, 1,400 square feet. The target range in this one was that the average household median income which is 100%. So let me step back. Another condition of the legislation was that the home had to be made available to individuals between 60 and 140% of the average household median income. Okay, and household is targeted towards, obviously, a dual income. We're focusing on, that workforce. And so the product that we looked at here is a little bit larger, more spacious, more costly, but that demographic that fell into that 100 to 110% of the average household median income is what we wanted to target here. So again, they're about 1,350 to 1,400 square feet. The 2-story units, which you see back here in the back, and is actually what this floor plan is, I'll scroll down and show it to you here in a moment, is about 1,680 square feet. That is a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-car garage. It has a back patio, so we don't have like barbecues on the front, that sort of stuff. So a lot of planning went into that. I'm just going to quickly just go through it, but this just shows you the living dining. There's a half bath. This is the kitchen, a utility, walk-in pantry, and there's the stairs. Then you're going to come in with the stairs and you're going to have the master walk-in closet, another walk-in closet, bathroom, 2 bedrooms. So without laboring the detail of, the floor plans, I'm just giving you an understanding of the level of planning, the level of detail, The project engineer that is assigned to, that will be assigned to the entire program through us is Staley Engineering. Matter of fact, the office was Staley out of Billings. Great firm. They work well, so they will be assisting with the land use assessments and, you know, just that kind of stuff inside of the program. And so it's a full suite, I guess, is really what it comes down to as far as us being able to assist. And so step number one is communicating, talking about what is the potential land availability. Is the city, county, school district interested? Are there even available parcels? Is there any little things out there? Because again, to construct 5 or 6 unit equivalents doesn't require a lot of land. And that's just, you know, step one. And then we'll go into, there's a whole nother portion of this as far as employer participation and others later that'll expand the program. So that's who I am, that's who we are, that's what the program is. And so with that, I'll open it up for discussion, and I can, you know, answer questions as we move forward. So
what about the folks that have a house that they have an eyeball on? Is the program still gonna be available to those folks for mortgage assistance and all that? That they're not starting from the ground up? Is that a possibility, or is this program strictly build and buy type thing?
It's new development, and the reason why is because we had to, number one, if HEB was going to be responsible for matching the funds, they had to make sure that there was product there.
Okay.
And so the whole thing then is geared towards the assumption that there isn't, you know, the physical asset that is available. And you know, with the deed restriction requirements and the reuse, you know, of the assets, that precedence on that deed restriction requirement has to be very specific. So just to utilize those funding for, you know, a refinance purpose, you know, for example, if those funds would have been there and it would have been used in that fashion, the county would have been responsible to meet the matching funds.
Oh, gotcha.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we had to make that assumption that it's just not there. And that's where, you know, we went in and figured out a way to actually provide the construction and development dollars as well. So the total investment in the community, if you think about it, isn't just the state monies. It's the equivalent to, in this case, per home, an additional, if you assume the home is going to cost $400,000, for example, I'm just going to use modeling right now, right? Well, that home is going to be sold to the consumer at $320,000 in this program because it's sold at a 20% discount to anticipated value or what it would be. That effectively meets their down payment. So you assume that that's roughly about what the cost is. There's the state monies, the matching monies, and now this additional, you know, 320 or whatever that would be to build it. That's a community development investment by the banks and others into the community.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so then when you further restrict it, again, as I mentioned, with the right of first refusal to buy the asset back and then turn around and make it available then to a second consumer, a third, a fourth, that it becomes truly a stabilization tool. So unfortunately, that it can't be used for existing product just because we couldn't even make the assumptions that, you know, it's tough to dig in the pocket.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
So.
And this has got to be within local infrastructure, utilities. We're not talking what
Nothing has to be.
doesn't have to be.
But it just comes down to, you know, obviously, you know, if we're going to bring these resources, you know, we want to try and have it where, you know, there's an semblance of economies of scale, you know, so that's going to drive, you know, ideally density, you know, and municipal services potentially and other things. If at the very last straw there is anything there, you know, we can't exclude things if that's, you know, what we have to look into, but we're going to have to take all those things into account as well.
Okay.
So it could be a spot, just for sake argument, say the county owns 5 acres somewhere.
Rattlesnake View.
Pardon?
rattlesnake.
Right, there you go.
No.
But what comes to mind kind of is Stony Brook, which is, it's a community in, but it's its own. It's its own water, it's its own sewer system, it's its own area, but it's not part of a municipality. Does it develop all of that with the sewer and water, not just connecting to something that's existing, but from the ground up for a project like this? Say because Montana City has no, basically,
Doesn't
water
have
and
public
sewer,
infrastructure.
public infrastructure such as either one of those. It's all separated, or it's all part of a group of houses that do it with a water user association and a sewer system and a drain field that serves all of those people.
And you would just, in that case, just be able to tie into those services.
Or create their own,
Create their
that's my
own.
question.
You'd
Oh, I
be
see.
putting in a new
Oh, on
system
fi-
to serve your new development.
You just have 5 acres of bare land that
Yeah.
there is nothing there. And it's not, there's no way to hook it into a municipality or anything because it doesn't exist.
So that would be, or we could go back to, Corey's inquiry about, individual, well and septic application too, right?
And
So
could you
that-
do, and I guess that's where I go is could you do that type of development that you showed us on that 5 acres, except there's no services there, even though it's close to whatever, it's close to a store, it's close to services, there's just no water and sewer.
You just need extra land to be able to accommodate them.
Right.
And
Yeah,
then you
and-
put in the public system.
And how it would
that's
be
what it
designed,
requires.
it's like
Yeah.
that community septic, depending upon
Yeah.
what the design parameters of that, you can increase, effluent flow and processing and all that kind of stuff, sand filtrations and, all that kind of
It's a
stuff.
matter of how much you wanna pay,
Right,
Right.
really. The closer you are to existing infrastructure, the better off you are.
they'd have to pencil that out, whether a community system would be cheaper than individual septics and wells, I
Right.
guess. If a community well and a community septic might pan out better if you got 5 or 6 units.
And it would
versus-
depend on where it is. I mean,
Right.
1 acre of land, you could put a house on it in a septic system and water, depending on where it was. So technically, really, in reality, something like that 5 acres might be 5 houses.
Yeah, you could. I think if it's, I don't know geographically where it's located, but it sounds to me it's located to other services, right? Stores.
Stores, restaurants.
Is it just outside of the city limits then?
Well, it's a fictional piece of property
Yeah,
somewhere.
the problem
Okay, I
with
understand.
Montana City is we do have zoning up there, and most of our lots are butting up against the maximum density on them. So there's might be some that we could split in Montana City, but it's probably pretty limited.
What comes to mind is if you drive from Montana City to East Helena, there's a huge area that is built just exactly like what you just showed me.
Right.
They're all probably 2, 3, 4 bedroom houses. They have 2-car garages, they have yards, and they're that far apart. But they're all, it's a whole system is what I'm trying to say. It's less than a mile from services, but there was nothing there when they built it.
Right.
So there's gonna be two things that are gonna drive that. It's gonna be DNRC and DEQ. And that's really what it's gonna come down to, right?
And
So-
our county zoning.
Of
So we're
course,
not
of
spot
course.
zoning.
Yeah, and so, and then, obviously, what's gonna drive that? Well, we would need to understand, one of the first things that, we do on some of these houses, we go out and we do, we look at, what is the geographic study through, coring and understanding, what sort of system you could put in. How's the ground gonna percolate, right? And from there, then we work backwards in engineering, then what is the anticipated effluent from a project that would be of this size, and then kind of get some preliminary ideas on what that design would be. I would suggest in something like that, this is a part of when I talk about the land assessment that the engineer and our team would come in. while none of us want to put a whole ton of time into something that is hypothetical,
Right.
but at the same time, part of the B and D side of it, part of us understanding it is to be able to do those basic functions, to be able to say, okay, we anticipate it's gonna be this, you know, whatever that's gonna end up being in cost, and so then we can begin to kind of start to work backwards and see what we could do. There's also, you know, state, funding opportunities too for infrastructure that is available, to communities, like it's like way reduced, you know, cost associated with what that is. So there's other things that, you know, we can begin to look at once there's actually something that we can knock on. And now that you guys are aware of the ability for the construction development dollars to be a part of the plan, it really opens up a large box, right? As far as being able to look at these sort of things. And so, no, as a part of the team, many of the questions you're asking, we would be able to answer. It's just we would have to go through a bit of a process to determine how to solve.
That's my only question is, can it be done without municipal services?
The answer is yes.
That's,
And again, assuming, well, there's three, and she mentioned one that I didn't recognize, which is the county zoning, whatever that's gonna end up being, and then DNRC and DEQ. That's what it's gonna come down to. Are we in a closed basin here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so see, that's gonna be another thing too. You know, so when you look at being in a closed basin, then you have to mitigate your water consumption, whatever you're gonna end up being. Has to be from one place to another. So that's a whole nother box that is difficult.
and I guess that answers my question. I can see where it would be easier and more cost effective to do it in Boulder or Whitehall, which is basically the two main municipal services that you have. My only question was, does it fit if there was someplace else to do it?
So the answer to that is yes.
That's
Absolutely,
that
yes. It's just those are the variables and I guess bridges we would have to cross in order to determine.
So do you build it and hope they come, or do you have customers ready to go before you build it? I'm assuming you build it and then everybody finds out about it and
Well, let's talk about that. So, you know, if the way that we kind of envision this happening is that looking at it through the lens of an employer and employee retention, you know, opportunity, right? So first layer of employers is going to be in the public space. That's going to be you, the county, the participating municipality, if there is one, a school district, you know, others. And when you look at the ability to be able to put somebody into a home that they otherwise wouldn't have had the down payment, that otherwise would have put them out, that now all of a sudden is a fully attainable, meets everything they need. And when you compare it to what the other options would be, you know, number one, the product wouldn't be there. Number two, they couldn't afford it. Based on the discount of sale methodology and the decreased mortgage, there's going to be plenty out there, right?
Sure,
And
yeah.
so,
That makes sense.
and again, it's another thing. That's the reason why we don't have, you know, a realtor or salespeople or others, because I think that we feel that there's going to be an internal absorption of the product and that needs to be made available first. And if we all decide it's not necessary at all these levels, then it's going to be made available however is necessary, is kind of the way that I look at it. It allows this board and the community to discuss and talk about it as a tool versus just a new housing project. And this is the first time that you guys have been made aware of the true significance of that. And so I anticipate there's going to be more internal discussion, strategy, you know, what we do, where it would be potentially located, based on a lot of those variables.
So with our $500,000, how many units, if we could find a place in Boulder, let's just say example, how far does that 500,000 get us for construction, I guess? Does that make sense?
well, actually, it's,
The equivalent of what you just saw, based on the cost, I'm going to use the cost of what we anticipate the cost to be in buildings, I think, for example, here, having, the interstate and think, our cost ratios are gonna be close. That equates to 5 units that would be effectively, the full, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, fully functioning family units.
And that's with property that is hopefully already owned by the county or the city, or is that?
Well, remember, that assumes that wherever that property is originated from, whether it's from the county, the city, the school district, or a private individual, that they're paid back at the time of closing. So
Okay.
yes, that includes the land, but not the land as a contribution, the land being paid for.
Gotcha, okay. So we have a subdivision trying to get going up here on the hill. Is it 28 units or 20 some units up
Is
here
that
by the cemetery?
Yeah.
Bullocks?
Yeah.
Bullocks, yeah.
Mhm.
And it's a pretty good chunk of land up there. That may be a possibility if we can't find anything
And it
else.
already had subdivision approval, they just haven't put in any of the infrastructure in.
So I'm not sure what they're wanting per lot, but that would probably have to be part of the conversation if we decided to do a project up there versus right here in town, but that would be a private.
And that's already been annexed into the city.
Yeah, and we would need to look, at, what those costs are, right? Because, when you start getting into, a private or retail development side of it, many, many times you get priced out of the affordability range, right? And that's where, when we look at, for example, piece of land that maybe we have here, we're gonna be able to keep those cost measures down because it isn't market rate or, artificially inflated to need to cover costs. And so that's where, when I talk about providing a resource, it comes in at what would be a reasonable value. It is paid back and it's used as a collateral component, to the whole thing. And so when you get into private like that, it no longer becomes a collateral component because you have to front load that, right? And
Right.
so, that's
doable though.
yeah, I mean,
Depending on cost.
again, I think that what's healthy about discussions like this, and hopefully more you're gonna have, is you need to throw everything at the table, and talk about it and see what is there, and then we'll work backwards, into the numbers. The numbers are what the numbers are, cost is what cost is. At least we can get it to that.
So will this thing grow? I mean, as houses get sold and remortgaged and I mean, people in and out of them, does that add to the kitty, I guess, to be able to maybe do another house at another time, or?
No,
It's just
so
a
what
one-time
happens is
deal?
that investment in that asset, it stays, but what's being reinvested is not dollars coming in and out. It's the fact that on the right first refusal, it's actually being bought and then that same thing reintroduced
Okay.
to the next subsequent buyer. There's nothing that really grows, right?
Nothing
It's
that's
just
growing, okay.
what becomes the benefit is the continual reinvestment of that housing or housing unit. So it's not removed out of the system. In other words, we do it once and all of a sudden we find ourselves doing it again and again and again and again because the actual inventory itself is removed out.
Okay.
However, let me clarify, is that the state had intended for this to be just a stepping stone and for the CRO to explore employer participation tools. So for example, and we've been working on that, we're not, prepared, that's what I call chapter 2. Okay. And so when we then begin to say, okay, listen, we've proven it, it works, here's the mortgage product, we know that this now can be a viable, attainable inventory in our community. Now then we can begin to start to look at participating employers on certain participations on the back end and that sort of thing, that there will be a similar use restriction. In other words, even though there's an employer participation that falls more into a completely private funded program, the mortgage is still going to be at 30% of the income, and the inventory from a community economic growth is going to still be on the roll, it rolling in and out for a theoretical perpetuity. So that's when we look at it from an attainable housing infrastructure. That's how it's going to end up growing over time. Now that portion is not yet perfected, but we are very confident that what we've come up with will work. And that'll be a part of you know, we'll, you know, share with every community as to how that can work. I mean, it's a commerce thing, you know, when you start to look at it from that perspective.
Did you have a call at 10:45?
No, it was at 9:45 when I stepped out.
Oh, you got it, okay.
How long do we have to come forward with the project to spend this money?
As long as you need. The critical thing was to get it, that's why when I started the meeting and I said, for it to not be sitting at the state and for it to be pulled back and secured, now it's the community's money to use. And so we're not under a timeline. Now, you know, it would be advised that it's not, you know, years, you know, so that, you know, there isn't any potential clawback function or whatever from the future legislature. But for all intents and purposes, right now, those funds are committed. And so there isn't a deadline.
I think it sounds something similar to exactly what happened in Boulder in the sixties and early seventies with the affectionately known as chicken coops. What used to be farmland out here all of a sudden turned into streets, and all of the houses you see up there past the old gas station, Bossler's. And I mean, town really ended at the grocery store.
Right.
And that was done because of employees out at, it wasn't NBC at the time, but they had nowhere to live.
Very similar, and all the houses were the same.
Yeah, they were all the same. They picked a block and here's 10 houses.
You know, the biggest thing, and I guess the takeaway from this meeting is that, you know, typically when you look at the construction and development or the, you know, that whole process with new housing inventory, there's, you know, the governing bodies or the planners or whoever may be sitting on one side of the table, and then literally on the other side of the table is then that individual. In this case, we're all sitting on the same side of the table. It's a really interesting dynamic, very transparent. All the tools are necessary are now available and on the table. So it's really a completely different discussion. And so how we apply that and how we grow it over the years, that's going to be kind of a neat discussion, right? And it takes everybody's minds and input and participation to evolve that process. But just know this is what is available to you. That was the purpose for me coming here today. That's why I wanted to be here in person. This is the sort of thing you can't do, you know, over a Zoom call. And just to better understand what the tool, what the platform, what the resource, and the fact that your money is secure.
So does Billings Authority control this after everything's said and done? We got people in the houses, you guys kind of control it then. So if somebody moves out of that house, how does somebody apply to get back into that house?
So that's a part of that's going to be handled as a notice to the title and escrow agent. And so at that point, the answer is yes, the platform monitors that. There isn't going to be any responsibility that will go to county or others. Now, what'll end up happening is that depending upon how you want that notice to occur, so home sells or is going to sell and close, who then is notified? Now, the program is going to buy it back, but the notification is, you know, first right to determine what demographic. In other words, is it the intended new deputy that's necessary? You know, and so there can be kind of those discussions from kind of a notice of waterfall kind of effect. That's kind of how I envision it. And we're going to need to perfect that together, right, on how we would want that. But that's how it would be handled, and it would be handled as an escrow instruction.
Okay.
At the time of the transaction, and then that kicks everything out.
So if we wrote it up like between the county, the school, the city, whatever, we have these houses, and we'd have to prioritize who gets the gets those houses first. I
That's the
guess.
exact discussion that's happening between the public agencies and Billings right now.
Okay.
And they're doing it, in a very thoughtful and respectful way. So for example, like the school district piece, since we're not requiring on this side that there has to be a certain amount made available to the private or, others, it now then makes it where they're actually having discussions and making it. So for example, the school district has talked about, maybe, we'll utilize this percentage and then we'll make the rest of it available to, others first. And it's on that, waterfall, that employee demographic waterfall
Okay.
first before it's made available to the market. In this case, at least as it relates to their strategy. So very similar to what you talked about. And that's what makes more lands, potentially available. I don't know what the availability of a school district piece that's sitting there doing nothing that may be in or adjacent to, municipal services, or the same thing for, a piece of city property that we haven't thought about that's just sitting over there doing nothing. I mean, when we really start to investigate those sort of things, there's the availability really starts to come up.
Okay.
Could it be state-owned property?
State-owned property requires, it's a leasing function, the state has, disposed of parcels through wholesale and through long-term lease. The leasing function makes it difficult on the conveyance for the property and the land, obviously. And I know that they're exploring more options at the state level to see about if it's a qualifying program, can we sell it? But that's all just discussion at this point. That could take forever.
Have you figured out, are these designed for people to get into and live the rest of their lives in, or is it kind of a stepping stone?
That is such a great question. So what is really fascinating about this, and when we began to look at this, and as I was putting together the mortgage product, it self-regulates itself. So in other words, the intent is for it, the answer to be no. It's not intended for someone to stay in there forever. So if you think about a family that comes in and they're making 100% of the average household income. Right now, it's about $72,000 to $80,000. It's a dual income, mind you. So as they begin to improve and their income grows, so then is their payment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that then they're going to look at it and say, listen, now I can afford a home on my own. I don't need to be paying, this amount for that home, right? For example. And then there's also just the law of averages. This particular demographic usually is on a 7 to an 8 year ownership recycle, whether they relocate, whether it's their age, whether it's what we just mentioned as far as income growth, whatever it may be. The law of averages is that home is going to rotate on average between that 7 and 8 year period.
Okay.
So we're anticipating that it's going to be, just a rollover.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. So the more you make, the more your mortgage is going to be. It's kind of hooked to your.
And it's intended to be that way. So
Okay.
you can see how it self-regulates,
Mhm.
right? That way you don't have somebody that's money that's sitting on a piece of infrastructure that was intended to, be stabilized. And there may be somebody that makes it through the 30 years and buys the asset out of the program, and they live in the community as could be. But again, back to the law of averages, you can you're more than likely that's going to be a continued rollover.
So do you envision this program as like I think you already said this, an ongoing program where the county all of a sudden comes up with another $500,000, we can look at this program again to get 5 more houses, keep growing the program as we get money available. Is that possible, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of strategic ways that, those dollars, however they're sourced. I mean, we all know there's a plethora of funding options available to a body such as yours. But what's really fascinating about this is that this is an investment model. So just like, for example, the CRO dollars, I'm glad you brought this up, because if it wasn't an employer and it wasn't the state, the county wanted to raise dollars to invest and do the same thing. Now they're just taking the state's position is all they're doing, right? So the cost of that to the county is gonna be whatever the cost of that capital is.
Right.
Let's just use a bond issue, or whatever it's gonna end up being. That is your cost. It's all there is. So the question then is, does that cost, is it offset by, the economic gain of having this, within our community? And if the answer to that is yes, then that opens up a whole other box, because now those proceeds that are otherwise gonna need to be repaid back are actually invested into the asset, and they're protected by that right of first refusal. That right of first refusal not only does it allow it to be bought back and then redistributed again, it allows it to be bought back, and then if it's decided for that asset to ever be sold out of the program, it's sold out of the program at then a market rate, and then those invested funds are paid back.
Right, okay.
So
That makes
it ensures the recycle and the reinvestment of the asset, but it also protects those who have the invested capital in it, including the program. I mean, to come in and build this at, a 20% discount, that has to be protected.
Right.
That's how that's protected.
Yeah.
As well as also, the state monies legislation, if home is sold out of the program, then those monies must go back to the revolving fund. Very similar to a structure, just like what you just said. That's a fascinating thing, because now all of a sudden, I mean, you could be building hundreds of homes depending upon, what sort of a structure you wanted to do. And that becomes really interesting too, because going back to the cost of, let's just say it's bond proceeds, going back to the cost of that, that's where participating employers that are benefiting from their employees utilizing that inventory, and now all of a sudden, while that mechanism hasn't been created yet, we're just thinking very abstract here. That then could potentially be the offset so that the county nets zero. Do you see what I'm saying there? And so I squirreled out on that too. It was really a neat thing, but if we expand that out, that opens up a whole nother availability.
Yeah, I was just thinking if the county could invest in something like that, that would really help our employees staying here and actually getting employees in, to be able to offer them, the housing that they can invest in. And yeah, I think that would be a good way to retain and get employees to look at working for the county, I guess, so.
Yeah, initially we have 5 to start with, that we don't have to source that funding, which is kind of neat.
So somebody decides to move, to sell the house. What happens exactly then?
Okay, so let's say for example, they came in and they got the 20% discount. So we're gonna start at $400,000. That means now they actually purchased the home at $320,000.
Okay.
As an example. They have no down payment, and their payment is based on 30% of their household income. Now, by statute, what happens is they will get a 1% rate of appreciation per year on the cost of the home. So they're going to get 1% per year, basically appreciation or equity based on the 320.
Okay.
Year over year over year over year. And so then what happens is when they then sell, then that home is bought back into the program, and they will then get their accrued 1% over the period they were there. So if they're there for 7 years, they will have earned 7% of the original amount. And that's what then they would get. Now, what's important as a comparison is that had this program not been made available, and they were to come in and they were to buy that market rate. Now they're buying a home that's worth $400,000. Then you have to assume that they're going to get 100% finance if they're not going to do a down payment. Now all of a sudden you have taxes, insurance, mortgage insurance, and the payment. That payment is going to be about $3,600 to $3,700, maybe even a little bit more if they were to 100% finance. If we were to use the example of a household that's earning $80,000 a year combined income, their payment is $2,000, and that includes taxes and insurance. So what happens in that 7-year period is they actually retained the earnings of about $1,600 every month. Because they didn't make a $3,600 a month payment, they only made a $2,000 payment.
Okay.
And so what's important to understand about that, getting back to the cycle, if you look at that on an amortization curve, well, the first 10 years of an amortization curve is all interest. So here they are now burdened, right, with a $3,700 a month payment. They're paying, it's costing them, 47 to 50% of their total household income. They don't have money now to be able to pay for other expenses. Where in this program, they're able to retain that $1,600 a month. It's the same as, if you do a comparison, it's the same as equity every month, right? If you were to compare it to the other model. So if you look at the financial benefit to that homeowner, they not only got the 1% per year, but they got the $1,600 a month for 7 years. So when you combine the two and you compare that to what then they would have gotten had they done the other one and then sold the home and gotten full equity, this is nearly double the economic benefit through the retained earnings and the 1% rate of appreciation. And they got to live in a home that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford, and they were able to be employed in the community. That's where the difference comes in from when we talk about the attainability, side of it.
So does HABCRO then buy that from them? Just, is that how it works? Whatever, when they sell it, you got first right of refusal, so you would go back and buy that for the
1%.
however much plus the 1% per year.
Correct.
Okay. So they wouldn't be able to sell that house for $400,000, and that 3 or 4%, they were there for 3 or 4 years, they would earn that. Then where does that extra money go, I guess? But if you have first right of a refusal, it would never.
That's how we protect the state's investment, as well as ours. Remember, there's matching funds in there.
Right.
And there's also, a massive amount of deferred just in being able to deliver the asset and basically cost in the first place. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
so there's a side-by-side comparison that we've done. It's really fascinating when you look at truly what is the economic benefit and difference from one to the other. And it's profound. I mean, that's how we define attainability. And the goal is to get folks into an attainable, affordable housing product that they can otherwise live in the community. And then when you begin to start to compare what would it have cost them otherwise, which is the discussion we would enter into, it's really fascinating when you do the side-by-side comparison.
So if the mortgage payment's based on their income, what happens if the income goes down? Say a partner dies or is disabled or.
So that's a very important part of it, is that initially when we had looked at it, that the floor would have been what their originated amount was. However, in recognizing those sort of situations, there's going to be flexibility for that to be able to drop. So in other words, there's not going to be an immediate default provision. There's going to be able to be an absorption of life, I guess, is, because what you bring up is exactly what we need to contemplate. And so, yes, it's anticipated that, the mortgage, if there would be something that would happen, that their mortgage payment would be able to be adjusted, or there would be some sort of a mechanism that is going to mitigate a default. And there's going to be sideboards on that, right, where they can't take advantage of it, right? What's really interesting about this, is it's as much to focus on, the consumer protection side, but it's also important when we look at it from, an infrastructure component. How do we protect the viability of that as well, right? And so, but yeah, that's the reason why, even if you made more money, it doesn't disqualify. That's the problem with a lot of federal and state programs, is that they're like, if you do this, then you no more qualify, right? And that's problematic for me. I don't like that. It's like an iron curtain. So, like we talked about earlier, where if they exceed up, they're just going to get to the point they're going to self-regulate and decide that it's in their interest. We didn't tell them they had to get out.
Right.
Now, similarly, there needs to be an element of, life happens. So we also don't want to create an automatic iron default floor when something like that happens. So there's some adjustments that will be made in that, and we're in the final of determining what that's gonna be in the underwriting components now.
Sounds great.
A lot to think about.
Lots to think about, yeah, lots
We,
to chew
you
on.
know, I mean, we looked at it from every angle, and that's why I, every time I get to engage with folks to bring more into it, to bring more, you know, brains thinking about it and looking at it is neat. So,
Is the state gonna balk if a lot of the counties use it for workforce housing? I mean, they probably didn't put that in their legislation, that it couldn't be used for that.
it's for the community to determine what is the best to create attainable workforce housing infrastructure.
Okay, so it's
That is
in
it.
workforce housing, okay, perfect. They put it right in there.
And that's why, and again, I just wanna come back, that's why I'm talking to you now
Mhm.
in this way, so that you can make those decisions,
Sure,
so.
great.
Well, hopefully this has helped, and it's not confusing.
No, that's good.
And when we get further into detail and we get granular about things, that'll all come in as well, so. Next steps, we'll just close with that. So next steps are gonna end up being, identifying who's gonna be the point of contact for you guys. And whether it be directly to you, which we have no problem reporting back, it just, some are more involved than others. We then need to put together, and I'm gonna be looking to you to say, hey, you know, we strategized on these however many parcels. We talked to the city, talked to the school district, we've got, you know, interest in this. Or you're gonna come back and say, we can't find anything. And then we begin to start to, you know, bring in engineers and we start to, you know, assess it. But your initial task is to communicate with those other groups. And then, begin to determine what lands. And then once we identify it, then we'll come in and we'll work with planning staff. If it's, you know, municipal and county, and then we'll identify, you know, the highest and best use, and then, you know, begin to kind of start to work backwards from there.
Are a lot of the counties keeping it for themselves solely and not looking at the schools and the cities and stuff like that? Is that happening, or are they pretty much doing it as a community type thing, or?
You know, it's, I can't say what they're really doing, but,
Okay.
you know, it's completely up to you to make that determination.
Okay,
And I think it's like any relationship, right? I mean, if it ends up being that, you know, you're able to do it without the utilization of other resources, then, you know, it's your decision.
okay,
I guess is the best way for me to put it.
sure. Yeah, makes sense. Cause the city does have some lots that would probably work for this, so depending on what else is available.
You know, and I had an interesting with Custer, it was a neat discussion because they started talking about, you know, there was a block where there was like 4 or 5 blighted, you know, lots. And it's like the county thought, well, geez, if we went in and just, you know, bulldoze those units, whatever the cost of, you know, bulldozing and eliminating and getting it all done, that then determines the cost of the dirt, right? If you think about it, right?
Sure,
Well, now all of a sudden you just went in and you improved the part of the city that is a part of the county that you're able to now come in and geez, now there's water and sewer, you know? And so that's a whole nother discussion, but Custer started to go down, you know, in their think tank session, in addition to vacant land, you know, the ability for something like that. So I will echo, we do have 5. It's gonna be in the best interest cost wise, as well as just logistic for, you know, to the best that we can, these 5 to be in the same area and to be on a similar site, so.
I think that's doable, whether we look at that subdivision up on the hill or we look at the city's lots here in town. The county doesn't have anything like that within, I guess, the south campus, but that's kind of a different animal there than housing, huh?
But that's where, you know, whomever you're gonna end up bringing into the loop, this is your tool, your resource first. And
Right.
so, you know, that's where you're gonna be able to have, you know, even if it is the city or however it's gonna end up being, the ability to allocate your direct
Sure.
employee.
Sounds good.
Well, as things arise and you guys have your discussions, think of me as a resource.
Okay.
And so as you have questions and as you're gonna going through it and just ping me, Corey, and just,
Yep.
hey, John, here's a list of what, could you help us with this? And then that way you can bring it back to the next meeting and
Okay.
as you start to bring in, other folks, let me know how I can help.
Sounds good. Do you have business cards?
I do not,
No? Okay.
but what I will do, I'll circulate, our communication and all of that. What's gonna end up happening is that we'll end up, when we bring in, you guys identify, we'll bring in the project engineer and then it kind of fits into a queue of more, kind of a project management sort of a thing. And then you guys will be updated and, all of that. So.
Okay,
But I'm gonna provide you all, my contact information by email and communication, all that. We've communicated, through text and
Right.
right now, but I'll make that more formal.
okay. Sounds like a plan.
And, do you want that initial to go to you? Would you like all three to receive it? Cause I can send it out to.
Either way, you can give it just to me if you got my contact and I can give it to the rest of the group here.
Great.
That's easier for you.
Well, thank you for hosting me. I'm glad we had an opportunity to
Yeah.
get together and help you guys understand. We're excited about it, so it'll be a neat thing. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sounds like a great thing. Looking forward to it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. With that, then I guess I'll conclude my portion of this discussion and, look forward to hearing from you guys soon.
Sounds
Do you
good,
have any
John.
questions? Great. Nice to meet everybody.
You
Thank
do.
you.
You as well. Thank you.